Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. My name is Jasmine Russell. I'm the CEO of Monocat Data and Sunset.io, based here in the Twin Cities, and I'm so honored to bring you an incredible group of panelists. To start things off, I'll just introduce the panelists to you. So, from left to right here, Amanda LaGrange is the CEO of Repowered, an IT disposition firm and social enterprise. The organization's operations include electronics recycling, refurbishing, and retail outlets, of which all create jobs for people facing barriers to employment. In 2010, Amanda helped found TechDump as a board member. In 2013, she left her corporate finance to join the organization and was named CEO in 2015. Amanda has testified before the Minnesota legislature on the right to repair and was named a 2021 GRIST 50 Fixer. Let's give it up for Amanda. Next up, we have Matt Ladhoff, VP of Customer Service and Success at Ecotone Partners. Matt Ladhoff leads customer success for Ecotone Analytics, an impacts analytics general benefit corporation. Ecotone strives to help clients better understand, quantify, and communicate the impact they are aspiring to create. Matt also teaches leadership development and social entrepreneurship at the University of Minnesota and previously worked at Wallen Education Partners, a Twin Cities-based education equity nonprofit, as well as in corporate philanthropy for 3M. Let's give it up for Matt. And then last but not least, we have Dr. Jose Diaz, Chief Economist at the Constellation Fund. Dr. Diaz specializes in cost-benefit estimations and applied economic models in the areas of microfinance, education, and nonprofit organizations. He holds a BA in economics from the University of Carabobo and is native Venezuela, a master's degree in public administration from Hamline University, and he received his PhD from the Applied Economics Department at the University of Minnesota. Dr. Diaz has taught economic theory in several prestigious universities, including the Herbert Humphrey Institute of Public Affairs and the University of St. Thomas. Let's give it up for Dr. Jose Diaz. Okay, so when we think about social impact, and specifically social impact data, it can mean a lot of things. And I will be asking for some audience participation. I don't have any prizes, but I will be asking for some audience participation, so I hope you all just entertain us for a while. So the first question, let's talk about the definition of impact measurement. Anyone want to volunteer? When you think about the impact measurement definition, what comes to mind? Oh, I will call somebody out. How about here in the blue? Yeah.
It could be, how much environmental impact you have, maybe like tons of carbon avoided. It could be an example.
Yeah. So for those listening in, the audience member said environmental, measured in tons, measured in quantity as an example. So to the panel, when you think about the definition of impact measurement, what comes to mind for you?
I think you have to start, Mr. PhD. Give us the real definition here.
Well, it depends on the context. In an environmental, for an environmental enterprise, like tons of, carbon monoxide, those kind of things are the units and the outcomes that we're measuring. In our world, in the social impact world, could be measuring an outcome. And what that outcome is varies tremendously. Like it could be graduation rates, it could be improvement in health, it could be improvement in the employment rate, your educational level, and so forth. So that's the contextual part of the concept. But then when we talk about impact measurement, we have to start with the word impact. And that's where things get a little bit more complicated, because we want to move from correlation to causation, to say, what's the impact of this specific intervention or organization on the life of the participants? And that's a very difficult question to answer and to measure.
Yeah, I love that thought of impact on the life of who it's measuring or what it's measuring. Matt and Amanda, thoughts on that? Definition of impact measurement.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I would just to expand on Jose's point is talking about specifically what evidence base there is. And one of the things that I think Jose with Constellation Fund, as well as our organization, we talk about the economic cost-benefit analysis. So this idea that in order to contextualize the impact, we want to talk in terms that folks are familiar with. Often organizations, businesses are thinking about revenue, profit, and we want to be able to talk about that impact, whether we're talking about social or environmental outcomes, in that same manner.
And then if we get really complicated, we'll throw in the hard to measure things like happiness or self-confidence. And my bio shared a little bit about the work that we do at Repowered, formerly known as Tech Dump and Tech Discounts, where we're working with adults with a history of incarceration. And we've spent the last 6 months trying to figure out how to track our impact on a person's self-efficacy, their confidence. So you can get like very abstract very quickly, or you can stay in the math, but there's always a way to measure something, is what I would offer.
Yeah, so, and thinking about some of these concepts of cost-benefit analysis and some of the abstract definitions, how do you think social impact measurement data has changed over time, especially within these last few years? How has it shifted from your observation and your industries?
I'm going to start to keep the sequence. So a little bit of this is my personal kind of a naive history of philanthropic, or the philanthropy world. Everything starts in a simplified world with an entrepreneur, a social entrepreneur with an idea about solving an issue that neither the government or the for-profit sector has been able to solve, right? I have a great idea, but I don't have the money to implement that intervention. So I knock the door on somebody who has the resources, the money to do this, and I ask for the money. And it becomes pretty much a sales pitch, like the ones that we've been hearing all this week around, and how to do it. So depending how good this social entrepreneur is, he will get more or less money from this philanthropy. So that's the early stages, still going on the same way. A lot of philanthropic money goes in a table when somebody is pitching an idea to a rich person. That's how it works. With all the caveats that implies. How do I know, how can I get connected to the right person to get the money? It's not very different from the for-profit sector. I would say it's a little bit worse because you're not selling anything that's going to make this rich person richer. It's just going to make them feel better. So it depends on the interest and the capacity of this social entrepreneur. Second stage, move forward time, 1 year later, you need more money. You knock the door again, and the rich person will tell you, what did you do with my money that I gave you last year? So you start counting things. You count how many people walk through your door of your program and how many people you work with. That's the output part of the evolution of how we measure things. At the end of this, not at the end, but the next stage, you say, well, third year, 5 years down, the rich person or the funder, in this case could be a foundation like mine or an individual donor, will say, okay, you're counting people, but what's the impact on the life of these people? What you're really getting with the money that I'm giving you? And that's not just the number of kids that are walking through the door, it's how better they are at math, at solving problems, et cetera, et cetera. So those are the outcomes measurements. The final stage is what we mentioned at the beginning, which is, well, how much of that change in that particular outcome comes from your intervention and not from something else. That's the scientific part of the problem. Like, you have to control for demographics, where these kids live, the quality of the teachers, and a series of controls and other factors that could affect that. So that's my naive story about philanthropy. That's how impact measurement has evolved from telling a story, counting outcomes, counting effect.
Yeah, I love what you said there about evolution, because data is often like a tale and a story about evolution over time.
Well, the beauty about evolution is that it happens, you want it or not. It's coming at you.
Yeah. Amanda and Matt.
Yeah, I would just say that it's exciting while we're still certainly in the early days, that we are continuing to see it gain traction. I mean, the fact that we're on main stage, this is continuing to be a bigger topic, I think, both for nonprofits, but as well as corporate organizations. With just this past year, the SEC saying in the near future, we're going to be mandating environmental risk disclosures. And I think we'll talk about social risk disclosures are going to be in the near term, beyond that. So certainly growing momentum.
And one example that I'd offer from the last year is that we're starting to see progress in factoring in social impact into spending decisions. And I think we as individuals could give examples of how we think about the purchases that we make or the decisions we make. But the example I'd offer is one that just recently we announced with Ramsey County, where they were putting out this request for proposals. And because we could, at Repowered, share our social return on investment, we were able to show that the tax dollars would go a lot farther than if the county worked with a company in Wisconsin that didn't do anything with workforce and wasn't even in the state. And so I think there's a piece of measurement that is, like, we've made progress on. It is now past time to use the measurements to make the best decisions possible for our community.
Yeah, some of the most impactful impact data is measurement for defense. Like, why should we support this cause? So really good point there, Amanda. Okay, coming back to the audience, another question. So we've all seen COVID. It's affected us in super dramatic ways. How has it impacted you within your industry, within your company? What are some of the key things that you've seen shift and change, or importance of what you measure post-COVID? And like I said, I will call people out. Yes? Hybrid learning? Say more. Thank you. So the comment was on hybrid learning and educational systems and alternatives in measurement for how that's changed over time. So looking at what you all have experienced within your industries, how has it shifted post-COVID? What are some of the metrics that you looked at pre-COVID? What are some of the metrics that you've maybe expanded on? And how have you really worked to put solid foundations inside your organizations?
At the Constellation Fund, we use benefit cost analysis to make philanthropic investments. So we pretty much estimate the return on investment for every grant dollar that the participants are receiving in terms of increased income or improved health. But that's a number. It's just a number that tells you how much additional dollars a participant gets for every dollar that we invest in this philanthropy. That number is a very incomplete representation of what the organization does. COVID, what reminds us is like the limitations of that number. You have to put that number in context and analyze the meaning of that number based on the situation of each organization. Like organizations that were able to navigate COVID and this transition from in-person training to online training, some organizations were better equipped to do that. We have to understand that because the BCR, the benefit cost ratio, for sure is going to be affected by COVID in negative ways in most cases when you lose participants. Basically that's people were not able to reach out to these programs the way they were doing pre-COVID. So we need to contextualize that and then make an investment decision that takes that into account.
Yeah. Matt, you mentioned a little bit about cost-benefit analysis. Have you all seen impacts with your clients post-COVID and those measurements and also maybe other metrics?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say even just like a broader observation is this idea of disaggregating data. That's been, one of the things that I think is core to what we do is really understanding for particular populations living on the margins, vulnerable communities, to understand that there is variance in outcome and really to be getting down to what the root cause is. I think that's been one of the things that we've observed with most clients both before COVID as well as kind of, I would say, the fact this is more in the forefront now, the attention, and we're able to get a lot more momentum around it as well.
Amanda.
Yeah, one piece that I noticed is where a lot of our work was focused at like the big picture of what we were doing as an organization. We had the opportunity to work on with Ecotone, sitting next to me, with a project that had some really significant government spending during early COVID. And because of the amount that was being invested into the community, the leader from the county said, I think we should do some impact analysis to show that we're good stewards of these dollars. And I mean, pre-COVID, I can't point to a program that was like, let's do an impact report and share all the things that we learned. But I think that there was just such attention to significant dollars flowing into our community, knowing that at some point, likely someone will come back and say, why in the world were you giving away laptops with a year of hotspot service, a headset, and digital navigation? Like, that was a lot of money. But because of doing this impact report, we could say, yep, it was a lot of money, but for every dollar spent, there was $2.40 of return on investment to our community and those that received it. And sure, go ahead and say that we didn't use that money well, but trust us, we did. And I think there's always enough money. It just isn't always flowing in the right places. And so I think it also brought into that conversation to say, okay, we had a period of time where resources were flowing in ways that we hadn't seen, that we know is possible. And so now how can we take what we learned and what we saw, and in these, whatever now normal we call this, let's use that same impact information to scale and do really good things together.
Yeah. Amanda, earlier you mentioned kind of a differentiation point across states and a decision point for your business. Thinking about critical points in businesses, what have been some of the most critical measurement metrics that you all have seen within your industries? Whether it be the story of you had a decision point to make and this metric helped you get there, or just some of the most critical metrics that you've seen that have really provided the most impact on your industries?
We have like 4 hours left, right?
Of course, we have all day.
A couple that come to mind really quickly. One, about a year and a half ago, we were looking at our data of our graduation rates. So we have an 18-month paid on-the-job training program. And we're noticing that if a person reached 90 days, they were far more likely to complete our full program. And so we've spent the last year and a half redesigning those first 90 days to make sure that people stay. So again, taking the measurement and doing a lot of really good work with it. But another that comes to mind is the balancing of business and mission, right? I mean, yes, Repowered is a 501c3 nonprofit, and as a former board treasurer would want me to tell all of you that where there is no margin, there is no mission, which means you have to balance it all. And so there have been a lot of really tough times that we've had to sit and say, all right, if we add this many positions in our impact work of employment, how does that factor into our environmental work? How does that factor into our work of getting affordable quality technology into the neighborhood? Like, there's just always these trade-offs. And so thankfully we have an awesome finance team who is used to me asking a lot of questions and liking to look at spreadsheets. But one more example that comes to mind, because, you know, we don't actually have 4 hours to talk about all the measurements. We've done a lot of work with some of our partners to find out who we're having the most effective referrals with. And so I think often we can get into these like really meaty, important, meaty conversations on benefit cost ratios. You can start really small and just say, you know what, when we work with this organization, this awesome thing happens. When we work with this organization, we don't see the same. How can we either improve it or shift resources and think differently? And so we've made a lot of decisions on how and who we work with as a result.
And I would just add, certainly understand and agree that with no margin, there is no mission. But one of the things that we want to talk about adding, and I think there's been other sessions as well, talking about just ESG broadly, about adding this decision-making calculus into our performance reviews. So when we talk about, what is our profit, what is our cash flow, what do all these different criteria of success look like? Just like Amanda talked about, I think the goal is that we're starting to evaluate organizations' performance based on a broader concept of impact and being less short-termism and thinking more long-term as well.
Jose.
Sure. I'm going to come back to the benefit cost analysis ratio that we use, because with all the limitations that this very complex computation has, it has many advantages too. Imagine that you're a philanthropist, you have $1 million to invest, and in front of you, you have 10 poverty-fighting interventions. All look good, all do a great job, all have a great pitch, and beautiful people. But then how do you decide, right? How do you decide where to allocate these scarce resources? The benefit cost ratio, it's a number, it's a calculation that reduces the subjectivity in the process. It reduces the limitations of the entrepreneur in telling a story. We don't care. At Constellation, you can come to our doors and tell us how great you are. We don't care. Show us the data, we'll estimate the BCR, and we will make an investment decision. And you can speak about it. Yeah. They are a grantee. So we minimize the impact on the human side as much as we can. So that number, that common denominator across all these interventions allow you to make a more objective decision. And again, it's not bulletproof. There's many advantages and disadvantages, but at least it's consistent across all the evaluations that we do. So if you want a key indicator of impact, it has to be useful. It has to be meaningful for you, and like I say, it has to make your life better in a way. Otherwise, just throw away the indicator, compute something else.
Yeah. You asked a great question on numbers that have been impactful, and I was thinking of all the numbers that we use, but I feel compelled to talk about one that we don't use, like very on purpose.
Yes.
So I was giving a tour, and this potential funder, they've never given us $1, so you can guess how they felt when he asked me, like, what are your recidivism rates? Which, for those less connected to their criminal legal system, that's a way of measuring if a person returns to prison after coming back into our community. And I was like, oh, we do not track recidivism. And he's in his like very foundation mode. Not Jose, not Constellation Fund, just so we're all clear. And he was like, what do you mean? I was like, well, it's a flawed metric. Like, yeah, you can say, here is this way of assessing, here's this way of looking at data. But if you have a racist criminal legal system, and then you're using a metric that's underlying all of it, like, it's still a flawed metric. And so that was one of the moments that I, with my numbers spreadsheet loving heart, was like, oh, impact measurement can still go very south. And I think that's a really important part, and why I love talking about the benefit cost ratio and looking at the social return on investment versus saying, like, here's these 5 metrics and it's all about that. And I don't know if we'll have time to get there, but there's so many ways of looking at that benefit that goes beyond just, I think, some of these more antiquated, racist metrics. I mean, let's just go there. So that's one we don't use, and I could talk all day on that.
Well, Amanda, I mean, you opened up the can to the next question, which is good. And Jose, you've also talked about it a little bit with limitations. Matt, we'll start with you. What are we not measuring in impact measurement? What are we missing? Of course, there's so much you can do within data science. There's metrics for days. You can get vanity metrics. You can go nuts with vanity metrics. But what's missing within your respective industries or just within data impact as a whole? What could we do more of?
Yeah, I feel like I could double tap on both of the things that have been talked about previously, just in terms of whether we're talking about ESG, talking about cost-benefit analysis, this idea of using decision-making or impact measurement as part of our decision-making criteria are all things that I feel like we have the opportunity to do now. And as Amanda talked about, we are seeing organizations and individuals making more of an effort to do that. There's still big opportunity, but lots to go.
Jose, you look like you're thinking.
You always have something to say. I'm going to make, sometimes comparisons are not very nice, but think about all the big data and data analytics industry and framework and machinery that is going on in the for-profit sector. So you have Google, you have all these corporations, you swap your car, they already know what you want, when you want it, how you want it, and it's not magic, it's just data analytics. So they are not listening, well, they probably are. And they are trying to sell you something. It's not all evil. I mean, they are trying to solve your needs in the best way possible. I wonder, and this is my pitch every time I get to a stage, is why don't we have that machinery working in the social sector? Why don't we have data analytics at the maximum expression working to understand poverty, identify the consumption patterns and needs of the most vulnerable people and minorities, and find the solutions, the best solutions that are very effective, very efficient, very cost efficient, and find the solutions in a timely manner for those needs that nobody else has been able to solve. So my pitch is always to start measuring things that matter, start creating that machinery, that mechanisms in which we can start by collecting the data. We don't know much about poverty. We know it's bad. We know who they are. We know where they live, and that's it. We don't know. The truth is that we don't know much about poverty, as much as we know about wealth and consumption. So we have a long ways to go in terms of developing and applying the technology that already exists and bringing it to the nonprofit sector and the social sector.
Yeah. Okay, one last question before we open it up to you all. So I hope you've been thinking about some questions that you want to ask our panel here. Final question. With all of these ideas and all of these needs, after you've implemented and found and spent the time to really identify data needs, impact needs, how do you maintain it within your organizations?
You make sure it makes sense, right? So just a couple of examples. Our team looks on a monthly and quarterly basis at some key metrics. And every once in a while, we'll be like, you know what, that doesn't really match. An easy example would be looking at turnover. I talked about our graduates and at what point they exit our program. And we were talking through, we're like, it really feels like we've had really minimal turnover, and yet this number is saying this. And we looked and we're like, oh, that's because we did this thing and we rolled out, I mean, this is like classic data nightmare, right? We rolled out a new system in the middle of the year and this didn't matter. And you're like, all right. So that's where, when we talk about like all of the automation that is to come, there's still a role for human brains and guts and thinking through like, okay, this makes sense. But that's where, and I think, Jasmine, you were the one that was talking about the narrative, the story side. Data is just data, unless it can either validate or you use it to poke holes in a theory. And I feel like the most important part of this data management side is not holding too tightly to any measurement, because what may have served you well for a time just doesn't make sense anymore. Or you saw such improvement in what you were working on that actually, like, that's the easy softball pitch. Like, you need to take it up a notch.
Ooh, that's like data church or something?
Yes.
We're all data nerds. What doesn't serve you, that is so true. So many organizations hold on to data too long. When it's like, okay, that was what it was then, now it has changed and you have to adapt accordingly. Matt?
Yeah, I was going to say, love continuing to make sure that data is relevant and that there's a normal cadence to reviewing that. I think another important element there is that there's clear ownership or who's responsible for doing that management. We've worked on projects with individuals that are sitting in product development to supply chain to finance and marketing. And this idea that it sits somewhere and that there is responsibility, I think, is another core element of the management piece.
Say more about that, Matt. Sitting somewhere and responsibility. That responsibility, like that word stands out. Say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this was an observation of really kind of the core of the topic that we're talking about is we can utilize impact measurement not only for strategy and decision making, but ultimately it goes into storytelling and the ability to attract investors or donors or all those things that are going to ultimately grow the cause and the mission of what we're working on. But in order to do so, we need to ensure that those individuals, whether they sit in more of the marketing side or the finance side, have a clear responsibility, and this is part of their own performance metrics.
Yeah. Jose?
I want to come back to the usefulness of data analytics or impact measurement. If you have an indicator, you have tons of data, you have an indicator. If that indicator doesn't help you improve your organization, get funding, do something, move the needle in some way, throw it away. Don't spend the money on evaluation or anything. Because especially entrepreneurs are like, you have this fixed idea on what you want to do, and all the data and analytics can come in front of you, and you don't care. You want to do what you want to do. That's the animal spirit of the entrepreneur, and that's great. That's what moves society in many ways. But the most successful ones listen to the data, listen to the analytics, and make more informed decisions. This is the Moneyball story. Yeah? Entrepreneurs are like these scouters out there, like, saw a big guy hitting the ball. This is the great guy. This is the next big thing in Major League Baseball. Turns out that the guy, well, when you bring him to the big leagues, doesn't work. Why? Well, there is a bunch of statistics that would have tell you that before signing the guy, right? We have to learn to read the right analytics and use them. So that's the way we keep things going. Because if it is not useful, we will just throw it away or spend money where we don't have to spend money.
So Jose, so you like baseball. That analogy was beautiful.
I like soccer more than baseball, but it's easier If I start talking soccer analytics, you'll get all lost.
Amanda.
Well, I was thinking about the power of team, and I think often when you're measuring social impact, you don't actually see the end result sometimes of that intervention or of that impact. And I mean, environmental impact is a great example, right? Like you can't visually see like the social cost of carbon offset, right? Like, I mean, you can see the flip side of that, of the world is on fire and things are flooding. But even that, you can't really tie to a project or a program. And so I think especially for startup teams, having impact measurement to say like, hey, what we're doing is actually working. Because the change that you seek with your entity, you might not find within the first year, 5, 10, ever. And so that's where it's really important. And I think when I think about the very first social return on investment report that we did back in 2017, we did not do it for our team. It was to be able to go and talk to government entities and funders and large corporations. But the day that we looked at this final report, the sense of pride that our team had was inspiring. And we were then able to use it as we were recruiting individuals into our work readiness program to say, like, we know that this works. If you will trust in us, this is what we can provide to you of the long-term economic gains. So there's just so many uses. I mean, we're totally, clearly pumped to talk to you about data. We could be here all day, but I just really hope that you think about the ways that it can go way beyond just fundraising. There's so many ways that you can use it for good.
Yeah. Well, let's keep that data energy. Let's open it up to the audience. I don't even know if that's a term, data energy.
It is now.
It is now. Questions from the audience. I'll actually come over to you.
Thank you. Is there A/B testing in social impact? A/B testing is used a lot in terms of websites. Try it 2 different ways, randomize the people that are going to see one and see the other, see which one has more impact. But I have a feeling that it's not used very much in social impact, and I'm kind of curious why. Maybe I'm wrong.
So, Craig, can you repeat your question just again?
A/B testing, why not social impact?
Yeah, so I can give a couple of examples. What we have done, rather than saying like, okay, we have 2 people applying for a job with us. Person A, you get the job. Person B, you don't get the job. Let's check in with you in 5 years and see how you both are doing. Instead, we've gone and said, okay, here are these studies that have already been done for the individuals that didn't get the job. And so then we're able to do the equivalent. Because I mean, when I think we've talked about this a lot, of the balance of humanity with the data here, and that's tricky. In much smaller contexts, I would say we probably do some A/B testing, and we just haven't thought about it that way. I mentioned that we've been working on revamping our first 90 days. Well, we've got individuals that have been part of this next version of it, and we have individuals that were not. And we're seeing how they did. So there is some of it, but it definitely is not as formalized. And I think that has to do with the transparency that we owe to people of what they're expecting from us.
Matt and Jose, A/B testing.
Yeah, I think similar to what Amanda talked about, as a researcher, one of the things that our organization is doing is trying to understand what secondary research is already available. So as you talked about, I think there is, in particular cases, limited availability of A/B testing, but where we can, we're utilizing that, and we're taking macro analysis of that random control trials, and we're using that to inform the cost-benefit analysis that we're conducting with a particular organization to build out that logic model and that theory of change.
Same thing. We use pretty much the same methodology to compute our estimates. The other limitation is that you can have, let's say, a very nice randomized control experiment. You have a very nice control group and an intervention group for a very particular set of environmental characteristics. So it's very hard to replicate social interventions, even if you go one block away. Results may vary very significantly. So people, it's a little bit reluctant to do these kind of things. Also, there is the ethic limitations of conducting experiments on people. It applies very heavily on our sector. So there are some limitations, but that's not an excuse. We are still very much underutilized in all these kind of methodologies that are more robust.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like there's so much within A/B testing, especially within the social enterprise space, of making sure that there's careful conduct inside of it to get those results. Additional questions from the audience? Oh, let's see. Woman in, tan shirt.
Well, first I want to say thank you to Startup Weeks for having you. I'm like a kid in a candy store just listening to all three of you. I have the honor of running a small nonprofit called Upturnships, and we have applied for funding at Constellation, but being really small, we don't have the resources when we talk about looking at the data. So we looked at Ecotone, and we couldn't afford that, right? And so, Amanda, you kind of hinted at it a little bit. The question I would ask of all of you, from either from a social entrepreneurial perspective or even from a for-profit, if you don't have the funding for the resources, realizing the importance of data impact and making data-informed decisions and programmatic decisions, where do you start? What do you do?
Great question.
From the funding perspective, there is the chicken and the egg issue, and it's for any entrepreneurial idea. And you have an idea, and it is just that. There is no data. You can argue all you want about how good it is. You can bring data to support your idea, but it's not real data yet. You haven't solved anything. You haven't solved any need yet. That happens a lot. Your case is not unique. At Constellation, what we are doing about it, a couple of things. One is we're setting part of our funds to finance programs that are still at that early stages, where there is not much evidence around it or not data collected. So these are more prospective estimations that we can do. It's still a very limited amount, so it's not a fully developed fund yet, but we're moving into that direction. But it's a reality that collecting data and conducting this analysis is expensive. And I'm going to come back to the pitch of the infrastructure for collecting data that has to be more efficient in our sector. It should be able to collect that data without needing, investing in, survey data, which is super expensive and that kind of things. So we are not there yet. I think there is a long ways to go in terms of the other ways. You have to find for funders that are more able to listen to ideas than in our case, we're looking more for established organizations where we can show the return. It's just a different type of investment. No one is better than the other. It's just different types of investments.
My advice would be to start where you are. We have been revamping our whole program, and so it does not make sense to do another impact study until we've got time to prove it. And so we started by saying, okay, if our goals are to make sure that our work readiness employees are increasing their earning potential, removing barriers to employment, and increasing self-efficacy, how can we measure it, each one with one measurement? And we look at it once a month. And it's not like fancy anything. It's literally like, okay, this person got a car. It's very down in the weeds. It is a place that I think, especially for nonprofits, we can take advantage of the amazing university systems and finding some fellow data nerds. There's a really great program at the University of Minnesota that I'm blanking on the name of it. OTC, what is?
The Office of...
Find me after. I hear all the voices. Wonderful. We're gonna find you people. But there's a whole group that takes on nonprofit clients. They're students, and they're trying to practice exactly what you're getting at. So finding some of them will be good. And if you've got a board treasurer that's good with some numbers, they're another good spot. But it takes time. We've worked with both of these teams, with both Ecotone and Constellation Fund, and it is a lift. It is a staff lift to say, here's all the data. But I look forward to you celebrating when you get to just give them the data and pay them, because it's so much easier than trying to do it yourself, because it is hard.
Okay, we have time for one last question for our panel. I think I saw a hand raised in the back. Okay. Any other questions in the room? Yeah.
Just to follow on to that a little bit. Maybe it's a good ending question, which is for entrepreneurs who are trying to think about what to measure, right, when they're just starting out. What's your advice on mindset in thinking about impact and outcomes and where to start when you don't have a lot of resources to collect data?
Great question.
I can start. We probably have talked about it all week of starting with your minimum viable product. What is the most simplistic measurement that would tell you that you're in the right direction, that you're doing the thing that you're working so hard to do? And finding one or two metrics. I'm thinking right now of our strategic objective scorecard that's 40 lines, and every time I look at it, I'm like, oh my gosh, somebody needs to spend some time. It's me. I need to spend some time paring this down, because it's not really telling the full story. There's too much there, but less is more. And I think going back to what is the thing that if you were getting it wrong, you'd shut it down? That's the thing to look at.
Matt?
Yeah, and then the only other thing I might add there is make sure that you have a sounding board. So understanding who are other stakeholders, how is that resonating, getting feedback.
Yeah, start simple is the best way. Have a very solid definition about what impact means for you. Again, going to the sport, analogy is winning games is probably the most important thing. So what would be the equivalent of winning games for your organization? Pick a number, pick a measurement. Just one thing that will tell you we are getting closer to achieving our mission. One or two things. That's the most difficult job. And then you will have to find ways to say, okay, what are the ingredients, right? What make us different? What makes us great at doing this, making this team win, right? But that comes not necessarily just from the data or from the books. It comes from your good understanding of your process, right? Don't try to, anticipate the conclusions. You have a good understanding of your process. Measure it. Measure as much as you can at the beginning, because you don't know what comes in a cost-effective way. Don't break the bank trying to do evaluations. And then let the data speak and connect the data that you have with that main outcome of winning games or success that you have. And that connection is what's going to help you improve and make better decisions.
And I think that's a really incredible closing statement, letting the data speak. Thank you all so much for coming out to connect with this wonderful panel. Again, Amanda LaGrange, CEO of Repowered, Matt Ladhoff, VP of Customer Success at Ecotone Partners, and Jose Diaz, Chief Economist at the Constellation Fund. I'm Jasmine Russell, CEO of Monacat Data. Thank you all so much. They'll be around for a little bit afterwards, and feel free to come up and ask additional questions. Thank you.
Yeah.